California governor flouts COVID rules in Hawaii.
Mr. Reagan.
All right, so you've all seen the photos of Gavin Newsom flouting his own COVID rules at a friend's party. But did you know that he also flew to Hawaii with a bunch of lobbyists and flouted the COVID rules there as well? Oh yeah, he definitely did this. Now, here in California, we're not allowed to have Thanksgiving. And we can't even leave our house between 10 p.m. and 5 a.m. That's illegal now as well. Certain businesses can't open at all. And there are a gazillion other restrictions here in California. But Gavin Newsom, he's off gallivanting in Hawaii. For those of us who are facing incredibly serious restrictions here in California, this is like a punch in the face by the man who is supposed to represent us, supposed to govern us, supposed to protect us, take care of the people of this state. He's just punching every citizen right in the face. And then he's laughing, ha ha ha, and then he's going to go do whatever he wants, flouting his own stupid rules. Now, he's apologized for, the dinner, the party that he had for his buddy, laughing away, drinking wine at a vineyard, disregarding his own COVID rules. He's apologized for this, but he shouldn't apologize for it. What he should do is he should relieve everyone from the restrictions that he broke, right? So he should say, look, if I'm not following these restrictions, they're obviously stupid, right? They're obviously something that either doesn't work, that I don't actually believe in myself, or I think that it is, that it's like a little too strict and people can't live with these kinds of restrictions. So I'm going to leave them off. I recognize that they're a bad idea. I shouldn't have done this. But he hasn't done that. He said, oh, sorry, I should really have followed my own restrictions. No, you shouldn't have. You shouldn't have followed those restrictions. Those restrictions are stupid. What you should have done is not implemented the restrictions in the first place. And now that you realize that they're so stupid that you can't even follow them yourself, just let everybody else break the restrictions by releasing everybody from them. Right? You don't need to have these. Okay, let me tell you something about the restrictions of we're not allowed to leave the house between 10 p.m. and 5 a.m. What the hell does this do to stop the spread of the virus? I don't understand this at all. The vast majority of people, right, they're going to bed relatively early, maybe 10 p.m., maybe 11, something like that. Most people are getting up, 5 or 6 a.m., something like that. So there's not that many people out at that time anyway, right? And the few who do go out that late and are partying or going to, bars or something like that, you could curb that by saying no parties, no nightclubs, right? We've already had that stuff implemented since the beginning of the coronavirus thing. I don't agree with that either. I don't agree with any of the restrictions. But at least that's more sensible than saying you can't leave your house. There's a curfew. Like, what the hell are that? Are we all like teenagers? Like, what is that? That's mental. We're not allowed to leave the house between 10 p.m. and 5 a.m. Now, here's the other thing that's insane about that, right? There are some, say, like 24-hour pharmacies or 24-hour grocery stores or whatever, right? And there's lots of people who work, people who are essential. Lots of people who are essential, right? They're working 8-hour days, 10-hour days, sometimes 12-hour days. They're working a lot. And between 5 a.m. and 10 p.m., right? Let's say they're getting ready for work for an hour or two in the morning and whatever, and then they're working for 8 or 10 hours. And then they've got to do their grocery shopping, something like that, right? So they've only got a very small window in which to do all the stuff outside of their work life, and the stuff they need to do out when they're not at home. But you are limiting the time in which they can do that severely, right? To a very small window sometimes. And by limiting the window in which lots of people can do something, you're going to end up packing places full of people all at the same time, right? If you have 24 hours to go do something, and you could do it in the morning, you could do it at night, or you could do it in the afternoon, and let's say the afternoon has tons of people, it's very busy, so you don't usually do it then. You usually do it in the evening or early in the morning, something like that. But now you can't do it in the evening. You have to now do it at that time, at the busiest time, noon. Then you're going to go there when everybody else is. And in fact, everybody else who would normally do it at night is going to go there when everybody else is. And so you're packing the businesses more full of people than they would have been if you had left everything to be 24 hours. You left everybody to get out and do whatever they want whenever they want. Limiting the time that people can do things just packs them all together tighter in a smaller window of time. I don't understand that. That doesn't make any sense to me. All right. If you want to limit parties or nightclubs, limit parties or nightclubs. Don't create a curfew. The people who obey this are now more at risk of catching any kind of virus, whether it be coronavirus or the flu or something like that. I mean, what you're doing doesn't make any sense. Now, here's another thing that's kind of funny, and it's not as essential a thing to talk about in a news story, but it is something that I think you'll find quite fascinating. I spoke to some people when I was on vacation. I was just in Hawaii. And I spoke to some people in my hotel. We were in the pool. We were actually in the jacuzzi. This really big jacuzzi that's like in the pool. You have to. Anyway, it's kind of irrelevant what it looks like. But anyway, there's several people there, and we start talking about what I did for a living, which is not something I wanted to talk about while I was on vacation with random travelers. But they kept pushing me and asking me different questions. So eventually it kind of came out what I do for a living. So then we got into a little bit of a discussion about politics, because these people were all from San Francisco. And they seemed to be, they were like very, very wealthy people. And they seemed to be very knowledgeable about politics. So you got these very rich white people from San Francisco, which I originally just assumed that they were in some kind of technology thing, right? Because they're from San Francisco. But then they started talking about politics. They seemed to know, at least to some degree, what they were talking about. And that was quite surprising. And obviously they were trying to challenge me on certain ideas. And you will be happy to hear that I obliterated all of their arguments, and they went running away from the jacuzzi as fast as they could, which was not my intention. I didn't mean to humiliate anyone. I didn't mean for anybody to run away. I wasn't even really trying to talk about this stuff, but they started talking about how the election could not have been stolen. There was no evidence of fraud and all this kind of stuff. And I said, well, there's actually quite a few red flags, right? And I start to kind of enumerate the different things that I had read about and that I've been talking about on the show and investigating myself. And finally, these guys couldn't really respond because they hadn't heard of any of these things, or if they had heard about them, they didn't believe them. And so finally I just said, okay, look, what's your guys' problem with Trump anyway? Like, what's your deal with Trump? Why do you hate Trump? Because I don't really understand it. You guys seem smart. You have a lot of money. You're white. What is it that you hate about Trump so much, right? And I was expecting them to say something like he's a racist or something like that. But what they ended up saying was very strange. They pivoted in a direction I did not expect. They said that Donald Trump had weaponized the Department of Justice, and they thought that was to them a sign that he was a kind of like an authoritarian, right? And I thought, well, that's a kind of a funny thing. How do you figure that he weaponized the Department of Justice, right? So they were saying how they had made the Department of Justice like Trump's private lawyer, and we talked about how that had been sort of blocked by the Supreme Court, and Trump hadn't sort of overruled the Supreme Court or anything. Trump doesn't. Anyway, that was a bit of a silly point, but they eventually got to the case of Michael Flynn, right? And how they thought that Trump had inappropriately supported Flynn, despite the fact that Flynn had admitted to lying to the FBI. That was, to me, a very odd thing for them to pivot to, because I didn't know that a lot of leftists really knew about that. I mean, maybe people who watch Rachel Maddow, because she attacks Trump for just about every little detail she can possibly imagine up in her crazy brain to attack him for. But I thought that was a very strange and very specific thing to talk about. And it wasn't until obviously I said to them, I was like, well, you do realize that they pressured Flynn into that admission because, by threatening his son. And they said, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter what they did. It only matters that he signed that document that said, that admitted guilt. And I said, so you're saying that no one has ever in the history of the world could have possibly, that doesn't happen. That's not a thing that actually happens, that nobody admits to anything that they've not actually done because of some kind of pressure from law enforcement. That's never actually occurred in the world. Like, that's not something we should ever even consider. If you signed a document that says you're guilty, you are guilty. We should never consider anything else. And they said, no, that's not what we said. I'm like, well, that's kind of what you said. And they seemed to know. They seemed to know all the stuff I was saying. And they seemed a little bit surprised that I knew about it. And they couldn't end up, they didn't really have a good argument, right? Because Flynn wasn't prosecuted because he actually did anything wrong. Flynn was prosecuted because they were trying to get him to flip on Donald Trump, right? They were trying to go after Donald Trump. It was all a ploy. We all know this. We all know about all of this. But it was funny to me. Like, it was strange that they would even know about that, because it's something that does not make the left look good. And yet that is what they picked to say that's why Trump's a bad person, because the left persecuted Michael Flynn because they wanted to get at Trump. That's such a bizarre tactic. But when I left Hawaii and I was reading about this, that, all these politicians and lobbyists had gone to Hawaii, I realized, because they went to Maui, right? And that's where I went. And that's where I met up with these people. So I don't know if the people that I was talking to were in fact lobbyists or were in fact politicians or anybody related to this trip. But I suspect they might have been, because they knew too much. And they went in a very bizarre direction. They certainly didn't win the argument. They certainly didn't show in any way that Trump was a bad guy or had done anything wrong. But it was such a specific direction to go in. It was such a bizarre thing. So anyway, that was a fun encounter. Again, I'm not looking to get into political debates with California lobbyists or politicians when I go on vacation to Hawaii, but when I do, I like to destroy them. All right, well, that's it for me, and I will see you guys next time.
This is the specter our well-meaning liberal friends refuse to face, that their policy of accommodation is appeasement. If we continue to accommodate, continue to back and retreat, therein lies the road to war. You and I know and do not believe that life is so dear and peace so sweet as to be purchased at the price of chains and slavery.